Hi, everybody. Welcome back to SaaS Founder Stories. My name's David Brennan, and today I have Dr. Ronnie Powers, the founder of Pluto Bio, with us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm super excited to learn about Pluto and what you guys are building. I kind of was on the website, and that looks pretty cool.
Thank you. We're really excited about what we're building also. So I'm the founder and CEO at Pluto. Pluto is a B2B SaaS platform for life sciences data analysis and visualization. And that means a lot of different things in life sciences. But for us, we can kind of center around molecular data types. So I'm a molecular biologist by training and computational biologist. This is really something that I'm super passionate about. So I'm excited to share with you what we're doing.
It's cool. How did you give me the origin story? How did you get into this?
hmm So I was, like many others, really excited about science from a young age. And I did study molecular biology in school and ended up in the wet lab. So I was actually running experiments at the bench. But outside of school, I was teaching myself to code and had the real kind of honor and, luck of being able to work at a video game company. And so I was doing both software and biology together. And it turns out that I learned in the wet lab, software is really important for analyzing data sets that we have now in biology. So I got really inspired to combine those two aspects because I found that many scientists, including myself in the lab, weren't able to analyze our data fast enough. So you would generate lots of data and then you would end up sitting on it and waiting for an analyst or somebody to really help you. And so I got really inspired through my own experience that way, but then also hearing from many, many other scientists in the lab that kept raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm having the same problem.
So cool. So for you, what was the catalyst to go from like there's usually this moment where you're like, okay, I'm gonna go do this. What was that moment for you?
I think there were many moments that I kept saying yes to and realizing, but I think a major catalyst for me is I've always really worked in human disease research. So studying cancer, studying autoimmune diseases, and realizing the bigger picture that this data analysis isn't just helping somebody publish a paper faster, it's actually a really critical step to developing a better drug that's going to help somebody with an autoimmune disease or with a kind of cancer. When you add up all of those different gaps of time, you realize this could be, pushing drug development back months or years even. And so that just really motivated me. I started talking with other software companies in this space and saying, hey, you should do this. What are you doing about this problem? And the answer that I kept getting back was actually, you should really do something about this problem. So
You knew the space. That makes a
mhm.
lot of sense.
Knew the
Well, that's
space, was
awesome.
clearly persistent and aggressive about it. So I guess that's
That's that's usually the way it is. You're intimately aware of the problem or the space, and you're like, okay, well, if nobody else is going to build this, I have to build it. So that's
mhm.
super awesome. Cool. And so we were chatting before, and I'm really excited because I haven't had anybody on the show that's chatted about what you're going to teach us about today. Tell me a little bit more about what you want to tell us about today.
In terms of challenges that we've really seen and
Mhm.
kind of growth as a company. So I mentioned I really started in the wet lab running experiments, and that was at an academic institute. And there's a lot of research done in academia. But a real kind of to get closer to that problem that I was just describing would be to talk with pharma companies and really enable scientists that are in pharma to be developing better drugs. And I was really passionate about that impact that we could potentially have. So, really, I personally had to make that transition from thinking about research in an academic fashion to really thinking about KPIs and ROI in pharma for the many life scientists that are, participating in that research. And so I started that bridge by basically taking the idea for Pluto to the Wyss Institute at Harvard, which is really focused on translational research and drug discovery and drug repurposing. And so then I was sort of halfway between the two worlds in academia and industry. And we really pioneered what we were building at Pluto through those kinds of industry experiences. But since then, since spinning out of Harvard and then being on our own, I really had to take it, upon myself to learn what pharma scientists were looking for when people are doing what's called drug discovery. What are they really focused on in terms of milestones scientifically? What do I need to learn about the biology to really develop a better cancer drug? So also commercially breaking into large pharma companies and learning that from a verticalized software perspective has been challenging. So really challenges everywhere.
So let's talk about like breaking into big pharma because I think that's you and I were talking earlier about large enterprise deals or those marketplaces. And I mean, big pharma is probably one of the most complex customers base to break into. Walk us through how you did that and what worked and what didn't work for you?
Certainly. So I think we did a couple of things early on really well. One of those was focusing on software compliance and security certifications. And I think really that applies to any kind of SaaS platform. So we knew because we wanted to reach big pharma ultimately that we should probably invest early on in some of those security. And so I do think that's paid off immensely in the long run. And I'm really happy that we made that kind of tactical decision early on. In terms of breaking into big pharma more commercially speaking, we found that there were a couple of ways to do that. The life sciences industry, there's a lot of activity. And so working with smaller companies that then get acquired by big pharma is a really common avenue. And that was one way that we were able to break into large pharma. I think really, building and nurturing relationships with our clients, though, was also able to lead to referrals across other enterprise systems and enterprise companies and other, pharma, mid-sized pharma especially. So we saw a lot of both horizontal and vertical movement that way. But it was really important to be able to speak to enterprise security, really from early on.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and often overlooked aspect of any type of software development or product development is like if you didn't know that was going to be a requirement, which you did, like you built it into it, so it makes it much smoother. A lot of people go in and
Mm-hmm.
they're like, "Oh, we want to sell to this industry," and then then they get asked, "Where's your compliance? Where's all of this?"
Right.
And they don't have any of it, and it puts a lot of friction in the process and
Mm-hmm.
stops them significantly. And I think when you put it up front like that, that's really, really smart. What other things did you run into? Like when you were obviously in the beginning of building this, you had some understanding of who you were selling to. Otherwise, you wouldn't have known compliance was going to be a big thing. What were some other things that you were looking at that you knew if we're going in after this group, we need to start thinking about this right off the bat?
Well, actually, I think identifying the right group is a challenge in and of itself. There are lots of different user personas, even within pharma, even within biology and science. You have different scientific teams that are focused on either early biology or translational science or later stage drug discovery. So there was a lot of education that we had to do and a lot of speaking with potential market segments and clients and partners just to learn even what the particular titles were that we really should be looking for as opposed to just, I was like, I'm going to go in and sell to the scientists, and they said, well, there are hundreds of those, so which ones in particular? So that was good news for us. But I think what's been really interesting about even just the past 3 and 4 years that Pluto has been around is we've seen commercial, go to market strategies evolving a lot, especially with AI being around now. And so things like cold email had worked really well for us before, or warm email had worked. Now we're having to evolve the strategies. Was that kind of what you were getting at with those questions?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's just really interesting to me because I think oftentimes with software companies, compliance is like, let's say being SOC 2 compliant.
Mm-hmm.
Most companies don't even think about being SOC 2 compliant until they're 2 or 3 years
Mm,
old and they're starting to. And so I just think it's really interesting because you kind of touched on it, the second part too, is like digging in and understanding who your customer really is, right?
mm-hmm.
I think that's a really important portion of
Mm-hmm.
being successful in selling software. And so I think it's just really interesting to me because those are the two things we talk about this all the time and on the show and in person, and that is knowing that customer and
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of touched on it because you said they have this specific problem and they're actually like they're going after a very specific thing. And when you actually can get down to that specificity with them,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to actually start saying, okay, this is the product, this is the approach, this is how we can actually target
Definitely.
them and find them.
And back on the security and compliance, the different teams within pharma have different compliance needs. So we get
Okay.
really far with the SOC 2 and that SOC 2 certification that we acquired pretty early on. But the more clinical stage teams in pharma might need something that's HIPAA compliant or GDPR compliant because they're working with patient kinds of data sets. However, for a lot of the translational science teams, which are sort of in the middle of those two, you can have SOC 2 plus a specific kind of compliance requirements that are related to genomic data. So if you're storing patient level genome sequences, you do need some additional protection in place, but it's not a full HIPAA compliance. So really understanding that spectrum and tying it back to your users, absolutely.
So when you were starting out with the product, did you know what you wanted to build, or did you take more of an approach that we know there's this problem where where we want to build a product and then work that way through it? Or did you have a really good idea of what you wanted to build from the very beginning?
I think I had a lot of opinions right from the beginning, but the approach we always knew would have to be iterative. So we knew about the very acute pain points of I have lots of data, I can't analyze that data. I'm waiting months for somebody to help me with that right now. That was a
Hmm.
really acute problem that we wanted to start with. And we knew also that we would want to expand the platform, though, beyond being a point solution. So we always sort of built that as one module or hub within the product, but knew that we would expand outward and do that in a really customer driven way. So we could hear from our clients what they were wanting to see next. And I think keeping that close feedback loop helped. But surprisingly or unsurprisingly, the product has really evolved in the way that I feel like I saw it coming to fruition 3 and 4 years ago. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Well, that means that's pretty good because a lot of people they're pivoting and they're moving. The product doesn't ever like that original idea wasn't there. So that's really cool. You touched on one other thing that I thought was really interesting. You said that you worked with like smaller companies that got acquired, and that was one
Mm-hmm.
of the ins that you made into the big pharma groups. How did you do that? Because I think that's just a genius way to be able to kind of just like get into it.
Well, we actually had a lot of strengths in the product that allowed us to do that. So we had great retention. You know, the product itself was very sticky, and so those scientists, when they were acquired, were advocating to keep the product in the budget. So that's great, right? Having customer love
Hmm.
helps in a lot of ways. Also, some of the features and capabilities that we had designed in the product actually helped that client get acquired. So, for example, you're storing your large, very valuable data sets in Pluto. Those are real assets that are end up being used in biotech due diligence. And so by encouraging our customers to securely share those data sets with potential acquirers through our platform, we got kind of further ins and exposure with those people that would be acquiring the company. So that was a little bit of creative product solutioning, I suppose.
So you got a bit of a networking effect out of it all.
A little
That's really
bit.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, well, that's super cool. So we always like to wrap up the show with you getting to ask the network what you would like some help with. So what
Mm-hmm.
what can we help you with?
Sure. So I've mentioned, a few times that we really work with big data. So I think SaaS metrics in big data spaces are always really interesting to explore. And specifically, there are a lot of technical challenges that we have to deal with for processing data efficiently. And that means we're really combating typical SaaS margins because we're in such a compute and storage heavy space. So I think anybody that really, has some good thought leadership about how they've addressed that, either on the technical side or on the investor side, how am I explaining that to investors? I would love that kind of advice. We're also looking for AI thought leaders. We have an AI co-pilot in the platform and are really trying to push the boundaries there on how AI can be used in life sciences specifically. It's really having a renaissance in biology that I'm excited about. So always looking for people to nerd out with on those kinds of topics.
Well, that's awesome. We'll have to have you to one of the dinners that I host where we have some fun
Sounds
chats
great.
about AI. Cool. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm going to be thinking about that for a while. You have an amazing day, and we'll
Thank
see you
you.